So this is a contentious issue that we need to take up with Uganda. We need to take up this issue with Uganda so that this matter is properly resolved. But secondly, we do not see any reason why our fishermen should be harassed in the waters. We need to come up with an agreement that these waters can be exploited generally. In the Indian Ocean, you've got Koreans, Japanese coming to fish in our waters here, and there's nothing we're doing about it. Why should Kenyan fishermen be harassed when they just cross the border here? And let us then also agree with Uganda so that we know exactly where the border is. Ugandans have brought in Marines in the lake, harassing our fishermen. We should also have Marine in the lake.
There is an imminent war which is soon going to happen between Uganda and Kenya because of the MIGINGO Island. The MIGINGO Island has been a dispute between Uganda and Kenya. It's now coming to 15 to 20 years, where both countries are coming out to say that it is their country. Okay? And I think 2 days back, the former Prime Minister RAILA and RUTO urged the Kenyan president to deploy Marine soldiers there, since even Uganda has Marine soldiers there. This was during when they were opening up, I think, a fish market in Siaya, that is Kenya. So the former Prime Minister asked the President to also deploy Marine soldiers so that they can prevent Ugandan soldiers from arresting Kenyans fishermen. This is akin to what's happening between China in the South China Sea, between Philippines and others, where China is claiming some islands within the South China Sea, whereas even Philippines is claiming the same. So I see a war breaking up between these two brotherly countries. So in this episode, I've come to talk about the comments which were made by the former Prime Minister RAILA and RUTO urging the Kenyan president to deploy Marines, what it means for our country, and most importantly, the certain materials we can learn from the politics of our nation. But before I do this, I want to let you know that if you're new to this channel, please subscribe. And if you're watching this video from a different platform, please head on to YouTube, type in Sula Mawagari. There's a lot of content of this nature. If geopolitics and economics is what you want, this will be definitely the right channel for you to subscribe to. First of all, the MIGINGO Island has been at the center of the territorial disputes between Kenya and Tanzania. From President Mwai Kibaki talked about it, from President Uhuru Kenyatta also talked about it. Now the former Prime Minister is coming out to say that they must also deploy the Marines in this island. And when you hear the Prime Minister speak, you clearly see that by following what the gradients or the communities which were appointed to see who is the owner of the island, Uganda was the owner. Now the Prime Minister is changing goalposts, saying that maybe the river shifted or something like that. And for me, that is hypocrisy. The Prime Minister RAILA and RUTO is coming out to say that they must also deploy Marines so that they can tackle Ugandan's Marines, and that is a risk for disaster because these two Marines will fight each other and it may lead to an escalation of a war, which I think it must not happen because at least Uganda has spent so much time without fighting wars and civil war. I think Kenya has never had any war. Okay? So the former Prime Minister speaking like this, it is a risk for disaster, is sounding war drums. Before I proceed, I want to play a tape when the Prime Minister was saying this. Here is the tape.
Stocks in the lake here had been actually dwindling. In the 60s, there was a research that was being carried out by the East African Fisheries Research Institute, which is based in Jinja. It was led by the late Professor David Basau. When they realized that the indigenous fish was dwindling, they decided to import species from other countries. They went to Lake Superior in Canada and bought another species of tilapia, different from the indigenous tilapia known as the tilapia nilotica. They bought another one, which is original ngege. They bought another one, which they bought in the lake. It was called nyamami, or giaba. Then they went to Lake Kyoga in Uganda and bought another fish, that is the perch. It's called the Nile perch. The Nile perch was not indigenous to the lake. It was imported from Lake Kyoga. But the Nile perch has a history. It was originally not a freshwater fish. It was in the Mediterranean. Your Excellency, you know, if you bring a saltwater fish into the freshwater fish here, it will not survive. It dies. Like if you take the freshwater fish to the Indian Ocean, it also dies. But this Nile perch moved from the Mediterranean into the Nile Delta, where the water, fresh water coming with the river, mixes with the water from the sea. And that the water in the delta is not very salty. That is how it started to acclimatize himself with fresh water. It started now moving up the river. The fishermen who caught it brought it up the rapids. That's how it managed to come all the way to Lake Kyoga. But from Lake Kyoga it could not come into the Nile because of the Owen Falls. It is that team led by Professor Wasau that brought it from there and planted it into the lake here to increase the need. And at that time, Your Excellency, the research was based in Jinja for the entire East Africa. And fishing in the lake was not restricted. Kenyan fishermen could go and fish in Uganda waters and also Tanzania waters. The situation has since changed. In 1971, there was a coup in Uganda, and a madman called Idi Amin took power. Idi Amin, in his madness, annexed several Kenyan islands and made them part and said this were part of Uganda. In fact, he said that the border between Kenya and Uganda was in Naivasha, and that he was going to redraw the boundary. Although he did not realize his dream, that situation is the cause of our problem right to today. Where is the border between Kenya and Uganda in the lake? When I was the Prime Minister, we appointed a team led by the then Minister for Lands, now the Governor of Siaya, Honorable Orengo, together with the Minister for East African Affairs and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, who is the current Speaker of the National Assembly. And they were tasked to carry out negotiations with the Ugandan counterparts. And those negotiations actually did take place. They went to the regional boundaries, they went to Uganda, they came here to Kenya, they went all the way up to Migingo Island, which was contentious at that time. I heard President MUSEVENI saying that Migingo Island is in Kenya, but the waters around Migingo Island are in Uganda. Now, as they were doing this, Mr. President, it came out that the coordinates that mark the boundary between Kenya and Uganda are based on the river Sio. That where the Sio enters the lake is where you begin to make the coordinates and the angles into the lake. Now, we discovered that River Sio, during one of those floods had changed its course and left it. It used to be one fort, but it moved back into the Kenyan side, several kilometers. So now the Ugandans are saying you need to measure from where Ribasio is today. But those days Ribasio was somewhere else. So if you take the coordinate from where Ribasio was entering the lake those days, then those islands are in Kenya. There are 5 islands: Sigulu, Remba, Hama, Wayasi, and I don't know which other one. There are 5. Lolwe. So this is a contentious issue that we need to take up with Uganda. We need to take up this issue with Uganda so that this matter is properly resolved. But secondly, we do not see any reason why our fishermen should be harassed in the waters. We need to come up with an agreement that these waters can be exploited generally. In the Indian Ocean, you've got Koreans, Japanese coming to fish in our waters here, and there's nothing we're doing about it. Why should Kenyan fishermen be harassed when they just cross the border here? And let us then also agree with Uganda so that we know exactly where the border is. Ugandans have brought in Marines in the lake, harassing our fishermen. We should also have Marine in the lake. So that our fishermen are not harassed unnecessarily in the lake. Okay? Having said that, there's also, you mentioned it, the issue of clutches of our fishermen in the lake.
That is Raila Odinga. It was a long conversation, but when you hear Raila Odinga speak, at the end he came out to say that the gradients which were followed showed that Mijingo Island was part of Uganda. But he gave an excuse, but the lake had shifted boundaries. And when it shifts, I think he would want to measure the gradients in another way. So if you bring that excuse, even Uganda can come up to say that even on their side the boundary shifted. So we shall be fighting over and over again. Since the gradients were gotten, I think it is only fair enough for the gradients to be followed. And if they are followed, Migingo Island remains for Uganda. Okay? I know the Prime Minister can speak because he's community from Saya, because he comes from Western Nyanza. Majority of people or fishermen who are being beaten are from Siaya, from Nyanza region. So he may speak defending his community, but forgetting that this is an issue which is supposed to be handled by Kenya and Uganda, not the region he comes from. Okay? So the Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, the former Prime Minister, disqualified himself when he said that the gradients which were gotten is because the river shifted boundaries. And that when they measure those gradients, Mijingo Island falls to the Uganda side. So he wants the boundaries of the river to be shifted so that Mijingo Island can fall on Kenyan side, which cannot be accepted. And for me, I think sober minds are supposed to enter this issue, or they must go in the courts of arbitration in the United Nations so that they can give a verdict. It's the only way, because the colonizers are the one who drew these boundaries, so they are better placed to either tell us where each country falls. But I think even William Ruto knows this. It's the reason as to why he's not deploying Marines. He knows Mijingo Island is for Uganda. Okay? Even once upon a time, General MUSEVENI came out to say that the waters are for Uganda. Of course, that's my opinion. Do make us by commenting about this. Thank you very much for listening in. If this is your first time on this YouTube channel, I implore you to subscribe, like, and comment so that I can be motivated to do more of such videos. I will see you on another one. Peace.